Sure. Now we will hear our regularly scheduled program at this point. That would be from the Finance Department with Krista Bosserman Wolf and her associates. Thank you, Krista.
Finance, what do they do?
You better hope they write you a check.
Madam Chair, Budget Committee, thank you. We've had our lovely, pretty slide up here probably long enough that we don't need to introduce ourselves at this point. However, I would like to take a moment to just acknowledge my wonderful management team in the audience. Many members of my management team are here today to answer any questions that you might have after we get through our presentation. And I am so grateful and pleased to say that I have a full management team now after a very long and challenging year.
Why aren't they all sitting in the back?
It's not church.
Come forward.
Oh, there's Haley.
You guys, make sure you're sitting closer to your microphones and speaking directly into them. Thank you.
Will do. So the mission of our finance department is, of course, to provide financial facilities, procurement, mail, and courier services to the county departments and other agencies so they can conduct the public's business in a transparent and financially responsible manner. Our department is comprised of 4 different lines of business. We have 13 programs and 101 FTE. We do a variety of services, so when we talk about the finance department, it's not just finance and what you would expect to be going through this process today as budget, payroll, and those things. We have a little bit of an approach of almost a general services department in the fact that we do include facilities. We formerly included the fleet management function, and we have our mail and courier services as well for the county. So this is a picture of our budget request for 1920. As you can see, we're requesting almost $22 million in our proposed budget. That's about a $900,000 increase from our prior budget. That increase is largely due to personnel cost, as we've all been discussing through this budget process, that we've had increases in personnel due to COLAs, due to PERS, merit increases. Our department is largely comprised of staffing and FTE, so this is not a surprise. Our general fund support, you'll see a bit of a decline on that, and we'll discuss our reductions in service in just a moment as we advance the slides. I do want to comment that our general fund support for our department, it is in addition to the allocations that we charge departments. So it backfills some of those items that we have not historically charged departments for. Right now, that general fund support goes largely to the director's office, as some of the items that I work on and my Haley works on are items that sort of support the county in whole, and are things that might not necessarily make sense to charge to the departments individually. For example, debt management would be one of those things. So I'm going to turn it over to Haley to talk a little bit about the reductions that we took.
The 2% cut requested to the department was $54,000, but Krista really wanted to get ahead of the challenge that we are facing. Opportunity, I should have said opportunity. Opportunities that we are facing, and she really had all of the managers, we should give credit to Krista and the managers for really looking at variances between budget and actual from the past. And so between that, they were able to cut general fund support by $330,000. A lot of this, there was some reallocation of employees, there was reductions in materials and services and capital outlay, and also some of the personnel increases that Krista talked about were absorbed by the allocation charges in the current year. So they were hired 2 years ago, so they finally hit the allocation this year, which offset some of our increases in the current year. Additionally, our facilities department, after their budget had been approved, was asked to go back and keep their staffing flat and reduced their budget by $420,000. And we actually were able to return those dollars to departments. Some, and you've heard throughout the last many days, many of the departments then give it back to the general fund. But so in total, reductions were $755,000.
Another comment that I would have on the reductions is part of what our department has been doing for the last year is as we receive the general fund support that we are budgeted and has been provided to us in our maintenance level calculation, where there's an opportunity not to spend those dollars and to save those, we have been saving them and tucking them away, knowing that the county needs to make a significant investment in technology. So that has been also part of what we've been doing. And so in returning these funds of the $330,000, a lot of that is due to the fact that we will not have those dollars necessarily to save this fiscal year, but we've done a balancing act of saving some and returning some. So I would like to share a couple of our key performance measures. I have a lot of material to get through in a limited amount of time, so I'm not going to cover all of these. The first one I'd like to point out for the director's office of what I think is the most important for the county is our bond rating. So currently we have a AAA rating, and it is our goal to keep that AAA rating. It allows us to essentially access the bond market and be able to get the very best interest rates possible. So it's a very important indicator of, financial health for an organization and how we're doing. The other performance measure I'd like to point out for procurement is we set a new one last year and began tracking that, and that is the small contracts. And we set a time frame and a target. We defined what a small contract is and said that we need to get those completed within 10 business days. So when we did the measurement in December for the December 31 actuals there, we were at 93% and we had set a target of 85%. So I'm very pleased with the efforts that procurement are making on those small contracts. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to talk a little bit about facilities measures.
So, good afternoon, Commissioners. We're going to talk about the first two there. We've got many measures, but the first one is the percent of facilities maintained in good to excellent condition. I believe that actually, as we're going through, we actually have been using the GSA manual for maintenance, and we're going through and establishing the database of all the facilities we have and maintenance we've done. We're actually going down in the efficiency because we don't have the staffing to get all the preventive maintenance done or contracted out. So that's why the first one is actually 32% by the end of December and 75% by the end of the budget year. The second one there is the square footage maintained per technician. So again, we actually have we use a BOMA, Building Owners and Managers Institute. It was an international study several years ago that recommended that for every 42,500 square feet of building that you maintain, that you have a technician. And right now we're at 62,681 square feet per technician. So that's why we're not going to ever get ahead if we're continuously getting more square footage, which we'll talk about that here too in a little while. But we have many issues, but that's just two of the measures.
So as far as financial management goes, I think one of the most relevant measures that you can see here is the percent of department budgets where expenditures do not exceed appropriations at the end of the year, and our target is 100%. The measures are done at the end of the fiscal year during the audit. So for 18-19, it's not applicable for December 31st, but you'll note that we have not met the target of 100% in the last 2 years. So looking at better controls and monitoring will be a goal in the next, over the next year.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the significant changes we've made in our department. The most significant, of course, that came about this last year would have been the transfer of fleet management to DTD. Essentially, after our longtime fleet manager retired, I had the opportunity to jump in and actively manage that function for a short period of time. And with my time with the staff, it was a good opportunity to look at both the performance management measures that we had put in place and some of their practices. And it quickly dawned on me that it would be a good time to bring a consultant in to evaluate that function. And through the process of bringing in this consultant, working with our fleet staff and then my partners in DDD, and through the assistance of county council, county administration, and HR, we came to the conclusion that we would gain a lot of efficiencies by merging these two functions together, and that they were best managed in the DTD function. We've also been looking at our MFR plan. So as you might recall, we were one of the initial departments that went through MFR originally, and so it's been some time since we have done that. Facilities has been actively working with Dan Chandler to revise their plan. They have a new revised measures, and I have reviewed those measures, and we're just in the final stages of putting the perfect touches on those measures to be able to incorporate them into our strategic plan. And additionally, with a new set of management on board, it's really imperative that we go through the process again to ensure that we all use the same measures, definitions, update our strategic goals. And so we're looking forward to working with Dan Chandler in the county administrator's office to go through that process. So technology, our favorite topic. The budget committee is keenly aware that we have a 20-year-old ERP. So the ERP, of course, refers to our software that does the accounting, financial reporting functions, as well as handling the HR functions. It doesn't meet our business needs today. It is 20 years old. It was implemented in 1999. We have done our best to keep it going. We've done a significant upgrade this year with my technical team. They did an amazing job in partnership with TS to get that up and going. However, we have such a high demand in the county. The county has grown so much in 20 years, and technology has advanced so much that, again, this is a definite need. It is not a want. It is a need. What we're doing right now to help us move forward with this process is we hired a firm called HRPMO to work on a gap analysis and to demonstrate what our PeopleSoft's functionality and capability is. And we'll be reporting back on that later this summer to the Board of County Commissioners. And then we also have budgeted some funds to have a consultant come in and help us do a cost-benefit analysis of what is the cost of re-implementing PeopleSoft with the correct setup versus purchasing a new ERP versus status quo, doing nothing. So we're looking forward to bringing that back.
On that same front, the budget software called Brass is 20 plus years old and is reaching its end of life quite literally. There's an end date of December 31st of 2020, I believe. We are in contact with the developer of the software, and he may have a patch shortly, but our budget team's already beginning to research the market to look for something that our current software has no forecasting capability. It has, it's basically like a glorified Excel spreadsheet. It does have some reporting that has been really helpful, but again, it doesn't meet our needs as far as managing the budget as we move forward. And something that will be really imperative as we move forward in these two initiatives is correlating the system of record, which is currently PeopleSoft, with the budget software and the accounting structure with our MFR structures. So currently, MFR and how it translates to the accounting system is different for every department. And some don't correlate at all within the accounting system. It's all done manually outside of it. So if the goal is to really do performance budgeting in accordance with our performance ClackCo, these two systems need to be updated to make that feasible.
And then I'd just like to note that a part of our proposed budget includes $1.2 million of budgeted funds in contingency for towards these two initiatives to help with technology. So debt management, that I decided to put a slide together on debt management because I think sometimes it is a task that is forgotten about. It's like there's little fairies that just magically make this happen. It actually takes a good amount of my time, a good amount of Jian Zheng's time as well to keep up on this. So currently, I'll be looking at reevaluating some of our existing debt on the DSB to see if we can save some money on interest costs. Currently, the market rates have come down a little bit compared to where they were earlier in January, and so it's looking like it might be advantageous, and if we can save some dollars, then we're going to help the county with that. We're also looking at possibly issuing new debt for the development agency and the proposed transportation facility. I know you've heard a little bit about those projects from DTD staff, and I would be helping them with those initiatives. And of course, we're continuing to evaluate all of our options for financing for the courthouse. And one of the things that I'll be working on this next year will be updating our debt policies as regulations have changed.
So staffing, finance is experiencing significant challenges recruiting into their senior, I'm not exactly sure the position title, but it's basically the staff that help with the audit, which is a mandated service and is very important so the budget is the plan and the audit is the actuals. And we have actually pulled the recruitment for one of our positions as we have not been able to get any interest or qualified interest in that. And so for the next year, we will be having to contract out services to do that because we just don't have the capacity to do all that work in-house without that position filled and with potential other complications in staffing. Additionally, I don't know if Jennifer wants to come up at all and talk about budget staffing or talk from there.
May I add anything?
I do
I'm
have a
kind of putting
question
her on the
about it
spot,
later, so-
but it's her vision.
Ooh. And remember, I've been here for 3 months, so it's a infant vision. But actually, thank you, Tom, because it didn't take me very long to realize that we will need to increase our capacity in the budget office. And we do have budgeted 1 FTE to come in at a senior analyst classification who will help us with our forecasting, our multi-year planning, and be able to provide more detail, much that this committee's been asking for in the last week and a half. But if we're going to continue to improve on our processes, our policies, implement a new system, take a look at our cost allocation model and other initiatives that we've all talked about, having 3 or 4 FTE in the budget office is a pretty low capacity level. And so we may need to look at even adding 1 more FTE, which would still keep us under our sister organizations in the area.
Another area that we don't have noted on our slide is that the procurement did make a request for 2 additional staff and had been willing and trying to cut down their other budget to absorb it. But we were given the mandate that we were not to increase any staff in internal services in the current year. But I would note that they're very efficient and amazing, and they're doing way more contracts than there's been a market study, and they're doing a lot more work than the comparative entities are doing. So not increasing the staff may affect timing of how they can get contracts out, just given the workload that they're being put under.
Then back to facilities, we're talking about staffing that we've been held flat this year because of budget concerns. But we know that in this, the next year, we're just waiting for the permits to come back from Oregon City for the OSU building to break ground and start building the new building here on the campus for OSU Extension. We still have the courthouse, but we also have, we've been working with Business and Community Services about the Gladstone Library. We'll be taking that over sometime after the beginning of the budget year, anywhere between July and we've been told October of sometime. We've been down there doing inspections, so we'll be taking over responsibility for there, and then we've been talking about the Oak Grove Library. We also go out and help the fairgrounds. During the fair, we've actually had staff, all 5, we have a a supervising electrician and 4 journeyman electricians, and we have to have the electricians out there during that entire week to make sure that we're supporting the fair. But we've had other staff out there when we're doing the setups too. So there's other facilities, we've been doing a lot of work with Parrot Creek and those things. So there are a lot of additional square footage concerns and just, again, lack of staff.
So with that, that actually concludes what we've put together for our presentations. We're happy to take questions.
Great. We have, first of all, Commissioner Humberston, then Mr. Feely, Ms. Lee, Ms. Coldwell, and Commissioner Savas.
So I noted in the facilities presentation that there had been an improvement in the facilities situation since 2.5 years ago. But with what we had to do this year, that's eaten into those improvements. I just remind Mr. Schmidt that in the long run, deferred maintenance is a zero-sum game. I know we're going to have to make cuts in a variety of different areas going forward this year. I would hope that we don't make any more cuts in facilities maintenance. We're already behind in maintenance to some degree, and when we add new facilities, that's going to increase your burden at the very least. We don't want to make it any worse. So that would, speaking for myself only, that would be a priority issue. It's kind of like roads. It's it's $1 to fix the road, or it's $10 to replace the road. So we have to remember that.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner. And Mr. Feely, then Ms. Lee.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. My first point is what Jennifer said about budget staff and the levels and the expertise. At my first meeting with her, I asked her, do you have enough staff? Because it's my impression you don't. And I've worked in a few budget offices along the way. I especially like the fact you have someone in charge of the forecast, because we have learned this year how important it is to have a good working forecast based on all the indicators that you need to roll into that. So the more professional that can be. And if you get software to assist you. Haley mentioned the brass software, and I told her in a private conversation somewhere along the line, I was shocked they still use it, because when I left my past employer almost 10 years ago, that thing was trailing off and sinking, and it wasn't very good anyway, and it did us no good to help categorize or present numbers to decision makers. I mean, it's virtually useless in that regard. So I think that's critically important. And again, because you're facing a shortfall, I mean, you need the tools to be able to do this work and free up time to do the analysis and discussions with the board. Krista, I wanted to ask you where you are with the ERP. I heard from HR that they've kind of identified options, but that's about where they are. So.
Right. So I'm working in concert with Evelyn. So from HR, we've been working together with Dave Cummings from Technology Services as well. And we get together at least once a month, if not more frequently, to discuss the ERP. And essentially, we are waiting, meaning finance, we are waiting for our analysis because from HR PMO, our contractor, and that should be done at the end of July. And that is going to help inform us for our next task, which is that cost-benefit analysis.
Right,
We
okay.
believe that whoever we contract with for the cost-benefit analysis, that the information finance will provide on this gap that we're doing right now is going to be critical for them to be able to assess the cost differential of, do we reinvest in PeopleSoft or do we buy something new?
Okay, and I asked Evelyn this morning, but I'll ask you, to what extent are you involving the county departments in your work at this point?
At this point, I would say we're not, because it's still very preliminary and very internally focused on, and simply because finance, the way our system is set up, it is all central processing still. So it's a very sort of old, outdated finance model, and the fact that everything has to come to finance to be entered into the system is not decentralized, and it's not implemented to be decentralized, where there are decentralized tasks and entry points out in the departments. So it's
Okay.
still
But they
initially
use the
very-
reporting and things like that.
Exactly.
right?
They get in
Okay.
and they use the reporting. That's definitely a critical part.
Right. So I mean, I told Evelyn this too. I would encourage you to involve them at the earliest possible time. I think that's critically important from
I agree.
my own experience. I wanted to give you kudos for working with Public Fleet Advisors. One of the principals is John Hunt, who I
Yes.
hired many years ago as fleet manager for City of Portland. I brought my city fleet pen today. But I mean, he's amazing.
He's great.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea when I hired him he was going to be that great, and he was actually named Public Sector Fleet Manager of the Year in North America at one point. And he took our fleet operation, which I likened to like a 1930s old garage. We had parts for equipment we hadn't had for 20 years. No, I'm not making it up.
It's a guy's play place, that's why.
Boys' toys.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
anyway, I mean, he just flipped that place on its ear. So, I mean, a great resource. I guess that's, facilities. Can you explain to me what you have in terms of a long-term capital plan?
Actually, we've been through this, in 2015, 2016, we really initiated, the commissioners had directed us to go ahead and find a new asset management plan. Right now, we use Impulse, which is an older plan, probably just like Brass. It's really not even meant, it's an industrial type program. But we've been using Impulse, and so we've went through a process now, second time, went through, which groups will use the program, really facilities more than anything. But we've went through and selected a possible new asset management plan, and looking at putting that, getting all the data in there that we have from our systems, our buildings, putting it in there and establishing that long-term life cycle program.
Right.
Because Impulse really does not have that ability at all. So
So currently you don't have a long-term capital plan?
We do not.
All right. So that would be great to have. We've heard a lot of capital needs, as we've heard from the various departments, building needs and other major pieces of capital. So I think moving forward, especially in a very tight environment, is critically important.
Well, I know when the commissioners directed this 5 years ago, what it's meant to be is, and we've talked to a lot of departments. So in this new asset management plan, we're supposed to get all the buildings, all the grounds, all the values into facilities to have control of all of that data, but we're not taking over for parks, we're not taking over
No, I
for
understand.
fairgrounds. But to have all this in here, so the commissioners
needs to
can
be
come and have
compiled.
one data point to pull up all the information for you guys to make decisions
That'd be great.
on financial decisions and have all that data.
Okay.
So create an asset information
Thank you.
system and
Absolutely.
strategic asset management plan, SAMPS down the
Housing
road is
authority,
where you're, yeah,
All the
moving
buildings,
towards.
need to get it in one, and we'll definitely need authority, direction from all the departments to give us that information to have that, so.
Okay, thank you. And the next person up is Ms. Lee.
Thank you. Does the 1.2 million for the software initiatives include some consulting services for the transition? Or is some of that included in the price of the software?
Right now, the 1.2 million is budgeted in contingency, so it's available to.
Sorry, I can't hear you
It's
very well.
budgeted in contingency, so it's available to be transferred into whatever lines that are necessary. Software for an ERP is very, very expensive. $1.2 million is a coupon.
Oh, okay.
So we've
So
saved a
what?
little bit. $1.2 million would be a coupon towards an ERP cost. So we really have just made a small dent towards most likely what will maybe get us started towards replacing Brass in reality.
QuickBooks.
So
So-
thus, we're going to do the cost-benefit analysis and bring you that full cost, because you will need that information to make decisions.
Ms. Caldwell.
Thank you. I don't know if this is a you question or a county administrator question, but the budget process you're going to be going through, which is going to be time-intensive, and hopefully will include not only guidance, but full participation of county members. Are you going to be hiring a consultant for that? Is that the plan, or are you using county staff?
Both. Both. We're going to use the expertise of financial staff and other departments, and I'm open to hiring a contractor. We have not talked about that in particular, but I'm looking at all options because we have a very short time frame to put this whole system in place, and we'll work together to do that.
And someone who already has the experience living through it,
Yes,
you might be
Yes.
money well spent.
yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Savas?
Living through it, I think the way you phrase that.
You think you-
So my question is for Jeff. When you mentioned the building across the way we're gonna build for,
OSU?
I was gonna say 4-H, and it wasn't 4-H, the OSU building and the Gladstone Library, to what extent are we involved in that? I mean, we're actually gonna pour this, dig the ground and pour the slab and all that, so what extent is your department involved?
We've been involved in the planning and contracting with OSU, so out of their budget, they're paying for we'll be paying for a county representative to be involved in that, but they will be contracted out. Again, we're talking about CLT, mass timber, all of those different issues in the building. But usually in a building, we will more or less tie in the ends up when we get done. I mean, when you're getting the foundation work done, the building, then it's facilities management and technology services going in and doing, the last technology, some electrical things, the security systems. We kind of tie up the ends, but we're there as a county representative to make sure that we're getting the value and what we contract out is actually what we get.
Okay. Okay, and did you mention CLT, just to tell Commissioner Humberston, because, anything CLT he needs to know about.
Yeah.
Driving out
We see
of
that.
Portland yesterday, last evening on my way back from an ODOT meeting, and there's a CLT building going up right in Portland, right on the boulevard. So,
They'll start going up in Clackamas County soon. Yay. So, okay, seeing no other questions at this point, you have 3 other departments to
A whole bunch of other presentations for you. Yes.
to speak about, and we've got about 35 minutes left in this time slot. So just want to put that. So anytime you're ready.
So we are going to come back to non-departmental. I realize non-departmental is the next one up, but instead we're going to go to, if I can point you in your budget books to tab 26, which represents the Capital Projects Reserve Fund. I'd like to cover that first since I've got Jeff at the table.
Okay.
So our Capital Projects Reserve Fund essentially is where the county historically has set aside dollars to address some of those larger projects that are either deferred maintenance, ongoing maintenance, or capital construction. This is the fund that we had talked about earlier in our county administrator's budget message that historically has received transfers from the general fund of $2.5 to $3 million to help fund it. But due to balancing this year's budget, we have proposed that there will not be a transfer this year of additional funds to fund this capital projects fund. Essentially, the reason why we feel confident that this is going to be okay for this year is that we have developed a very healthy fund balance. So if I point you to the brass report and line 1, it says fund balance at the end of the prior year. We've developed a very healthy fund balance. And that's come from a combination of those transfers in prior years or not being able to complete all the projects that we had expected to complete. And so we are going to draw down some of that fund balance on this year's proposed budget. So our proposed budget essentially is $14,390,931 for the capital projects budget. It includes, if I point you to the very long Excel spreadsheet, it includes this list of capital projects that we currently have budgeted. We've sorted them in order by what is life cycle maintenance. And so you'll see maintenance projects prioritized first. And then you'll get into the other projects that are either installation of new devices, new construction, refurbishments, but are not necessarily life cycle maintenance. And they're being done through a combination of either in-house staff or contracts or both. But this essentially is the list of what we believe needs to be accomplished in fiscal year 1920. And we are here to answer any questions that you might have about these projects.
So I have one quick question. So the first thing on the list I notice is a generator installation out of capital funds, $70,000, for that. So is that for the generator or just for the installation? Because what I'm wondering about the generators is if we're switching out of diesel into some other kind of, into gasoline or, whatever we can in cleaner fuel.
The project is, it's the purchase and installation. The standard for emergency generators in the county, we have one or two that are natural gas, but all the rest of them are diesel.
Okay.
And we actually do that maintenance, our electricians in-house and DTD's mechanics, because we went out several times trying to get a contractor that would respond in emergencies, and we couldn't get contracts from a contractor that would ensure that they would show up. So all the generators are, but they're all, with the exception of two, they're all diesel generators. But it is installation and the purchase of the generator.
Yeah, I have to tell you that personally, having never used a generator, I didn't realize there was any kind of difference. And I was having a conversation with a exec director of a huge complex in Clackamas County, and he mentioned how they were having to change out some of their generators and look for something that had cleaner fuel and, that type of thing. So it created a curiosity question for me, for the county, so thank you. Commissioner Humberston and then Commissioner Savas.
On the list of projects, is that in a priority order? Or is that just a list of projects?
I would say that it's a list of projects, but internally our conversations have been around doing maintenance first. Jeff and I have talked quite a bit about this. And with a change in leadership, there's always an opportunity to kind of revisit how things are done. And we've had a lot of conversations around maintenance, and that has been, I think, partly why you also might have been noticing that our facility staff are very present. And we're seeing them more present than perhaps in the past. I mean, it's been great seeing our guys and crews out working in the PSB doing the interior repainting that has been on our list for some time. And we're making efforts to do those things, not necessarily always when it's convenient for the departments, which has been some of our approach in the past, has been to schedule things only when the departments were, people weren't necessarily at their desks or at work. But we need to get through the work. It needs to be done. And so we're focusing on getting that done. And that might mean someone's out in the hallway with a ladder doing painting during the middle of a business day. And our approach to make sure that folks are aware of in that has been increasing our communications using PGA. They've been incredibly helpful in getting that word out and letting folks know, hey, there may be a slight disruption today because we're actually going to be present in the buildings doing those tasks.
So in the past, we've been basically maintenance ninjas, coming in whenever we can to not have people see us. Unfortunately, it also means that people don't know that we're even around. But to also answer the question, there are several items on here like replacement of rooftop units. We know that historically we've lost about 8 a year when we're going ahead and we're doing the maintenance, but one will just die in the middle of the summer. So there's some money in here that we know we budgeted for 8 of them to be replaced as required throughout the year. We've been coming back to the budget, pennies and nickels asking for this, but it's like, okay, we've done the analysis. We know that that's historically what we have to replace, so let's put the money in here to know that it's there to begin with.
So the actual answer to the question is that maintenance projects will come first, other projects will come second, and you haven't prioritized all of them at this point in time. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. The second question I have is regarding what Ms. Parks brought up. So you have diesel generators. I'm assuming that you're using storage tanks for fuel around that, okay. But the natural gas generators, I'm assuming that's not storage tanks, that's piped, correct?
Correct.
So Cascadia event occurs, strikes me that those probably won't be available.
Usually those have an alternate connection for propane.
Okay.
You can usually operate them
And
off
that's a
of propane.
storage tank on propane.
Right, we can go ahead and take one up there. We put a natural gas one on top of the Holman building next to the courthouse so we can run the servers and all in the Holman building for the courthouse, but it has the ability to go ahead and switch over to propane usually.
Do you have to change jets out or anything like that when you do that?
I believe it's already connected up. I don't believe there's a big change. It's a small connection.
I see one of you guys in the back shaking his head no, so I guess
It's
that
very
answers that
minor
question.
that you have to go ahead and, to do that connection.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, well, my comment happened to be on the backup generation, so if you're, have a backup generation system for the circumstance of a power outage, then I think natural gas, even propane, is pretty practical, but I think that there's arguments that in a more severe, whether it's a tornado or a hurricane or a cascading event, that you may not have access or, or you might use up. And what is the most replenishable or available fuel source in those kinds of emergencies, which is always hard to predict, but I think conventional wisdom it's been diesel, as much as I dislike diesel, but it's been diesel as the source, because that in an emergency is something that will be brought in from outside sources. Hard to fathom how bad it could get, but in those circumstances, but.
And we are part of the fuel shortage task force that works with disaster management, and have had meetings with the National Guard, even though they're going to go ahead and have like JP7, which is kerosene more or less. They stated that they could actually switch out to bring in diesels in their tanks to try to provide the fuel to us. But again, it's back to the diesel more than anything else. So it is a readily available fuel.
Good. Thank you. Would you like to move on to your next area then? Thank you very much, Krista.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Yep, so let's go back to non-departmental, which is the previous tab.
That's the best department of all.
It is. This is the one I frequently get the question of, what is that? So I'm here to tell you what that is today. So non-departmental, the title tends to throw people off because it is a department. It's a department of the general fund. Another way to call that is miscellaneous. It is the things that don't belong in any other county department, and so you put them within your general fund, and you call that either a miscellaneous or a non-departmental, and that's where they live. The bulk of this is also where we have the operating transfers, where we're talking about the operating subsidies that we provide to other departments. That is where this lives. It lives within non-departmental. It also holds the reserves and contingencies for the general fund. So those are some of the largest dollars in this particular budget. In revenues, you'll see that it pulls in property taxes as well for the general fund. And then it has contracts and professional services budgeted within non-departmental that are for items that are either jointly owned by the county, or maybe they're belong to the larger county, or they can't be assigned to any one particular department. I think an example of that would be courthouse security. That particular contract is kind of a combination between CCSO, the Justice Court, our court services, and so it resides within non-departmental as an example of a contract that, again, can't really be assigned to the multiple different departments. And so we have a large list of different items. You have a line item budget in front of you. It includes all the detailed amounts of transfers going out to the departments. It also includes things like our payments to local governments, which sometimes are different fees like water, Waymaster, those types of things. And then we include the small grants program for the board's office is also budgeted within this department as well. So those are the most significant items within the budget. Do you all have questions about this budget?
I see no questions on that, Krista,
Okay.
so if you want to move on
Let's
to,
look at some miscellaneous pass-through funds then, which would be under tab 28, I believe. So again, this is a line item budget of a variety of things. It begins with payroll services. And this has come up a few times as we've discussed our agency budgets and other service districts, that those agencies and service districts do not have their own FTEs or employees assigned to them, that they are all employees of Clackamas County, And so their payroll is accounted for within the general fund for Clackamas County. And so this is where you're seeing this. The very first one is Water Environment Services payroll, has a number of 0130. And so this is the amount of the West employees' payroll and benefits costs. The next one is North Clackamas Parks and Rec. This is the amount for their employees. Again, payroll and benefits. If you turn to the following page, you'll see the development agency payroll costs. Much smaller because they don't have a lot of FTE. And then after that, it goes into additional funds that we have here at the county. And when I say fund, I don't mean dollars, I mean a budgetary or GASB defined accounting and reporting fund. So the first one is our county school fund. We do not currently have anything in our proposed budget for the county school.
So this is funded by the Secure Rural Schools portion of the timber receipts, and those were extended through the current year, 18-19, which we have in here, and they will be dispersed out to the school this year. But we have I'm not aware that they've extended it until next year, so we haven't budgeted any resources at this point.
Right.
So you would be coming back to us for an adjustment if it comes in?
So if the federal government decides to create legislation that extends it or creates some other program that would be equivalent, then we would come back with a budget adjustment.
So then would that become a supplemental budget?
Yes.
All right,
Yes,
thank you.
Because again, that would be essentially new revenue
amended,
known at
but a
that time. But
supplemental.
at this
Gotcha.
point in time, we're not aware of any revenue for
Right.
1920.
Okay.
So turning to the next page, we have the Employer Contribution Reserve Fund. And we have a proposed budget of $2.7 million, but we have transferred these dollars to within the general fund. So what this is really just a realignment of our budgetary and accounting fund structure. Historically, those dollars have been in a separate self-contained fund, and we're shifting them into the general fund. We're still keeping the dollars in reserve and dedicated for those purposes. It's just a shifting of our financial reporting.
The county safety net legislation local projects is also funded by the timber revenues. However, it's not a pass-through. We manage those funds. They're restricted for very specific purposes, I believe, like fire and like forest fire and some other purposes. And so at this point, we've only identified to spend 95, so we're rolling over the fund balance, but they are restricted to very limited purposes. So we're not predicting to have additional revenue besides the fund rollover.
And we've been essentially, those dollars have been managed more recently by Nancy Bush's department in disaster management in coordination with finance, helping on the support side.
And I believe that also Rick from BCS has also been involved at some level.
So turning the next page, we have the transient room tax fund. And what this separate fund does essentially is it collects the dollars in from our local TLT, and then it takes in the administration fees for finance to administer that program, and then it distributes out based off of county code what is required for the fair fund and then to the TDC. The next fund we have is the County Debt Service Fund. And so this one accounts for all of our full faith and credit issuances underneath the county. So you'll see that we charge some rent where it says internal facilities rental fees. That is rent that we charge to the occupants of both the PSB and the DSB to help fund those two buildings that we've built here on campus. So that was designed long before my time. It's a process that basically helps us pay down those debt service requirements. And then you'll see that we have budgeted both the principal and interest for the upcoming payments for this next fiscal year. The next fund is we have a separate fund to account for the general obligation bonds that we issued for C-800. Local budget law actually requires that you have two separate debt service funds, and if you issue a general obligation bond, that is that requirement. Suddenly, now you have to have two. You can't just mix your general obligation bonds with your full faith and credit. So that's why we have two debt service funds here in Clackamas County. So just keeping in compliance with local budget law there. And again, so we have budgeted for the property taxes to be collected to help us repay that, and then we've budgeted for the upcoming principal and interest payments. The next fund we have is our LID. We have a very small amount of fund balance. This fund has really sort of come to a close. We haven't had an active LID area for some time, and so we're transferring that remaining balance into the general fund to help us prepare with closing that operation and activity down.
So will that mean you'll eliminate that completely by next year?
That's our intent. Anywhere where you can close a few funds, we have a lot here at
A whole
Clackamas
piece
County.
of paper
so-
that we will eliminate.
Yes.
We actually have to
Yes,
present
on
the
the other side
funds
of it.
for 3 years through the history, so you'll see zeros for 2 more years. So the piece of paper will still be there, but there won't be any activity. Sorry.
Crazy turn.
I know.
But it means less work in our audit report, which is just that 1 year in time and a snapshot on the historical aspect, so.
Thank you.
And then the following the following page, again, is like Haley said, we have to include information with, that's the zeros for the Damascus
examples.
Fund. We have closed that, but you have it because we still have 3 years of history. So therefore, it's in the book. And that concludes what we have for miscellaneous and pass-through funds. If you have questions?
Thank you. Seeing no questions from that, we appreciate your time at the table. Thank you very much. Thanks for the budget presentations and the discussion. It's very much appreciated, and the work you continue to do. So thank you both very much.
Thank you very much.
And all your staff.